Welcome everyone to our September Whiteboard to Boardroom webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Jim Baxendale, who is going to introduce our presenter.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the UMKC Innovation Center Whiteboard to Boardroom webinar series. My name is Jim Baxendale, and I work with the Whiteboard to Boardroom program. For some of you may be new to our webinar series, the technologies are presented by our institutional partners are available for licensing to form new startups or as new product opportunities for established companies. In some cases, as today, we also feature newly formed startups and innovators seeking CEOs, capital resources, strategic partners, prototyping, board members or advisors, mentors. Our presentations will vary. In some cases, as today, they'll be 15 to 25 minutes each. When we have 1 to 2 technologies, they'll be a little bit shorter. You can use the chat feature during the presentation if you like. Following the presentation, if you want to contact us directly to facilitate any introductions or requests for further information, you may do that. The presentations are recorded, and we'll send you a link to those presentations in a few days. We encourage you to share this information with colleagues that you think may have an interest. Also, if you have colleagues that you'd like us to include on our webinar invite list, just send their names and contact information to us at info@whiteboardtoboardroom.com. This morning, we have Dr. Maggie Koos, a pediatrician working here in the Kansas City area, and she will tell us a little bit about her invention. So Dr. Koos, if you'd like to go ahead and start.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, and this morning we're going to be talking about part of the personal protective equipment that healthcare workers use on a daily basis, the medical gowns. I know that a lot of attention during the pandemic has been given to the face shields and the masks and that protective equipment that covers the face, but today we're going to look at why it's also critical for us to protect the clothing and make sure that's shielded as well. So next slide, please. So we already know that clothing can be a source of transmission of infection. That's been studied, and it's whether it's bacterial or viral. If there is contamination of the clothing, it can transmit the disease to the worker wearing that clothes, but also to those that they come in contact with. So gowns are a very important part of the personal protective equipment, and they're actually the second most used personal protective equipment, or PPE, used in healthcare, second only to gloves. And so their whole purpose is to shield the clothing worn by the healthcare worker while they're providing cares to somebody. And so the FDA does already have regulations regarding these gowns and how they are to be designed. And so that's over on the right side of the slide. And so there are 2 types of gowns, both surgical and non-surgical gowns. And so the criteria, as you can see, the A, B, and C areas of the gown are all considered critical areas that need to have a barrier and act as protecting against contamination of the clothes. So surgical gowns are only seen in the OR. And so when you go to the physician's office, or you're in the hospital, or you just go to get a COVID test, those gowns that people are wearing are non-surgical gowns. So next slide, please. So of the non-surgical gowns, by far, the most commonly used are non-reusable. They're one-time use disposable gowns. And the problem with this is that these disposable gowns, they don't meet the current FDA regulations for covering the clothing underneath. So they are large, they are poorly fitted because the vast majority is one size fits all. And so that when you put them on, they gape down or they gape open. And the collar area of usually it scrubs, the scrub top of the wearer underneath is exposed. And so this becomes a real problem, especially when you're looking at a person who is wearing a scrub top and wearing these one-time use disposable gowns throughout their entire shift. It becomes a real concern because of how the clothing is removed, the scrub tops removed at the end of the shift after they've been exposed all throughout the shift. And that scrub top, especially that particular collar area that you can see in these photos here, that's being exposed as they're working, that scrub top is pulled up off over the head. And scrub tops are form-fitting. There's not a lot of give to them. And that collar area that you see exposed, it gets pulled right up over the person's mouth, nose, and eyes. And that's exactly what it shouldn't happen, because you are bringing possible live pathogens into direct contact with the mouth, nose, and eyes. And that can be a source of infection, of transmitting the virus to the wearer. Okay, next slide, please. So these are just more examples of people wearing various types of the one-time use disposable gowns. And you can see that no matter the style or the color or the manufacturer, they all sag down or they gape open, and that critical area of the collar is exposed. On the top left photo of the three healthcare workers, you can see someone's wearing a collared shirt in the middle, but the rest are all in their scrubs. I'm particularly concerned down in the bottom left, you see a healthcare provider is in an isolation room. And so they are undoubtedly trying to keep the virus from spreading, and they have a patient in an isolation room, and yet her clothing is exposed. And she believes she's wearing the appropriate PPE to keep herself safe. And so that's just the main problem here that we're trying to address. Okay, next slide. So the solution is to manufacture a one-time use disposable gown that does not expose the clothing underneath. So we want a disposable gown that meets FDA regulations, the current regulations. And in order to do that, we just need to extend the neckline up so that the tie, when you tie it behind you, it's around your neck and not around the collared neckline at the collar. So there, when the material starts to get sagged down and the person moves around and it billows forward, the clothing remains protected. It's okay if the neck itself is exposed, but it would keep the clothing underneath still protected. To do this is quite simple because it's just an extension of the material already being used. The drawings are of how this looks on one particular type of gown, and there are just multiple ways that you can secure it in the back. They're ways that are currently being used today. And so this solution is simple and it's effective, and it would take the current gowns being manufactured and it would make them compliant with current FDA regulations, and it would keep the healthcare workers safer, as they should be. Okay, next slide. So the current market use. So the hospital gown market size was approximately $3.1 billion USD in 2020, and it's expected to continually grow. COVID had a large, profound effect on that. And the disposable gown segment of that market is by far the biggest part of that. It's more than 65% of the share. And they anticipate that continuing to gain ground as well. And so the market use is for all of these disposable gowns being used because none of them currently meet the FDA regulations. And so my goal is to license my gown design to current manufacturers so that they can provide an effective disposable gown. The design is simple, it's cost effective because it's, like I said, it was just using the material they currently use and just extending it up to the neck to close at the neck rather than the collar. Next slide, please. So currently for competition, there are no disposable gowns manufactured that extend upward and close at the neck. I did do a existing patent search before this, and there are several gowns that are designed to have more coverage, but they are not for reusable, they're only for reusable gowns. There's nothing there for a disposable gown that's not cost effective because in terms of cost, safety, and quality, disposable gowns are preferred over reusable ones due to the cost of the washing, bleaching, conditioning required to reuse a gown. It's just too cost prohibitive. So disposable gowns will be the standard moving forward. And there's no current disposable gown that's designed in this particular manner. Next slide, please. So the status of the intellectual property, the non-provisional patent was submitted in August of this year. I'm excited. Next slide, please. So what is needed for further development? So the main roadblock to implementing this solution, I believe, is going to be getting an industry that is currently generating $2 billion annually in revenue to change what they're doing when they are not required to. Non-surgical gowns, the gowns that we're looking at, are a class 1 device and they are exempt from pre-market review. So no one is looking at these gowns and approving them or not before they come to market. And so what I'm really needing to do is I'm looking for feedback and suggestions on how to move forward. How do we address this? Because this is not only you're not meeting FDA regulations, but this is a safety hazard for healthcare workers. They're at increased risk because these gowns are ineffective. And I have some ideas on how to move forward, different pathways that could be the way to go. But I do think that whichever pathway we use, a video demonstration is the best way to show the ineffectiveness. And I think it's a great evidence tool that could be used regardless of the pathway. So next slide, please. So a video demonstration is something I would like to do in the moving forward. It's sort of a before and after, and it's a rather simple way of going about showing the ineffectiveness of gowns. And I believe that we could use a nebulizer machine that's different examples of different styles of nebulizer machines, but nebulized medications are a standard of care that's given every day in healthcare settings for respiratory illnesses, whether it's asthma or a respiratory virus that somebody has. And it does expel droplets, both of the medication and aerosols, but also the infectious particles from the person into the air. And this is actually one way that viral illnesses are becoming airborne or are being distributed in a room is when we use machines such as the nebulizer. And so this also can simulate a person coughing, because it also projects viral particles into the air. And so we could have two participants acting as the care providers, dressed up in scrubs. We would use a black light to display that the scrubs at the beginning of the video are free from contamination. They wear their standard PPE and they go into a room where they provide a respiratory treatment, such as a nebulizer, to either a mannequin posing as a patient or a third party posing as the patient. And in the nebulizer will just be saline and like a fluorescent liquid. So then you just provide that treatment. It takes about 15 minutes. And then you repeat that 10 to 20 times with the person switching out their gowns each time. And because they see at least that many people, that many patients in a single day. And at the end of that, you can use the black light again to show that their mask, their face shield, and everything like that kept their face free of fluorescent contamination. But I believe their scrubs, you would see the fluorescent particles contaminating their scrubs because the gown was ineffective at shielding the scrubs. And that would show the ineffectiveness of the gowns easily and visually. And so that is my thought of like a visual demonstration that these gowns are ineffective. And depending on what pathway I take, whether I go first to manufacturers or I go to the FDA, you could also then repeat this, having altered the gowns, to include the neck part, the extension, my idea, and then repeating this, showing that once you do have the neck extension, the gowns remain free from the fluorescent particles. So it shows the effectiveness of the solution. Next slide, please. So my potential paths forward. So I do, even though it will be a challenge to work with manufacturers that are profiting so well right now to change their ways, I do think that would be the simplest way forward, is to work with manufacturers and present this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to improve and actually meet current FDA guidelines and to just work with them. I did think that perhaps we could reach out to OSHA because this is a safety issue, and get their support as well. But I'm just not sure if that would even be feasible to work with manufacturers that are making such profits before they're forced to make change. So another possible pathway forward is to work with the FDA, to approach the FDA and show that and demonstrate that these gowns that are supposed to be protecting the healthcare workers are ineffective. They're not meeting their guidelines, and to help the FDA work with us to work with the manufacturers to push for change. And then a third option I thought was to work with a specific manufacturer, to sort of partner with them, get them on board, realizing the opportunity here is to license the patent to a specific manufacturer and help them and allow them to help push for the change in the FDA guidelines to require pre-market review. And that way, if they were already licensing my gown design and then we moved forward with FDA change, they would be looking at a larger percentage of the market. But those are my ideas for moving forward. And that's really why I'm here, is to really get ideas about what you guys feel would be the best way forward. And also, if you think approaching a manufacturer first would be the best way forward, who in that company would be the contact person to really discuss this with. Okay, next slide, please. All
Okay.
right.
Are we back on, Robin?
Yep, you're good to
Yep.
go.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions here for you, Dr. Koos.
Sure.
So one is, have you spoken to any manufacturers at all? And
No.
then secondly, do you have any idea of the additional cost of this change to a gown, or an approximation or anything?
So I have not spoken to any manufacturers. I just applied for the non-provisional, so I kind of wanted to get that in place before approaching anybody. And the additional cost, I think the cost that the manufacturers will be looking at is when they actually change. I don't know, but I would think it's when they change how they do things to incorporate a new design. But moving forward after that, once the design is being implemented, the additional material is negligible. It's the gowns, disposable gowns pre-COVID were approximately, they would be sold at market for about 40 cents a gown. And I can't imagine, I mean, of course, COVID, they skyrocketed, but just the additional amount of material there, I can't imagine would be very much. But I would think that the cost of switching over the design in their manufacturing would be the actual.
Yeah,
cost.
okay. Okay, Robin, if you want to cover the chat.
Sure. Well, Ronald Link has a question. He's got a couple of them in here. We'll start with this one. Is there any medical litigation around gowns in terms of infections and medical malpractice that would help justify the investments in a better solution?
So there are not currently. It would be a very difficult thing to prove that the source of the infection was the clothing and not anything else. It's a possible source. It's a potential source, but there are so many potential sources. I think that would be very difficult to prove. I think more you could prove that these gowns are not meeting FDA regulations, and that in itself is a safety risk and hazard to the healthcare workers.
Okay. The next one he has is, how many manufacturers are there? As you say, if you align with one manufacturer with a patented design, that would give them a competitive edge.
Yes. So I don't know exactly how many. There are a lot, but I can say that the major players would be Standard Textile Company, Cardinal Health, Aramark, Medline Industries, 3M, Stryker, and Primed Medical Products. Those are all like really major players, but there are a lot of smaller gown manufacturers.
Okay. And then we have a question posed from Matt Heelan. I hope, Matt, I said that correctly. Has there been any studies down around current gown design leading to more healthcare workers infected to give us a baseline in terms of new gown designs would reduce that number?
So there are studies that show that either improper removal of PPE and just not wearing PPE can lead to clothing being a source of live viral or bacterial particles or pathogens that can cause the transmission. But saying, and so being a source is going to, it's already been established, but there are no studies showing a percentage, how many people are getting sick due to the ineffectiveness of their gowns rather than another possible means of infection. I applied for an NIH grant looking at the percentage of healthcare workers whose scrub tops were contaminated with COVID viral particles, but that was rejected. No big deal, just 6 months of applications. No big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are currently all the chat questions.
Okay, okay. Anyone else? Well, feel free to, contact us through the whiteboardtoboardroom.com website if you like. Just go through that portal, and with any questions or suggestions, or if you'd like to assist Dr. Koos in some way, just let us know. So thank you, Dr. Koos, and all you attendees, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.